My feet throbbed inside my white nursing shoes as I pushed through the hospital's automatic doors at 3 a.m. 16 hours. 16 brutal hours of back-to-back shifts in the ICU, watching monitors beep their electronic symphony while families held vigil over loved ones clinging to life. The October wind cut through my scrubs like a blade, carrying the scent of approaching winter and the promise of another exhausting day ahead. Chicago never slept. But at this hour, even the city seemed to pause and catch its breath. Streetlights cast amber pools across empty sidewalks, and the distant hum of late-night traffic created a soundtrack I'd grown to associate with bone-deep exhaustion. I fumbled with my keys, hands trembling from fatigue as I approached my Honda Civic. The reliable little car had been my lifeline for 3 years, getting me from my apartment in Pilsen to Mercy General Hospital without complaint. Until tonight. The engine sputtered to life with its usual reluctance, but something felt different. Wrong. The temperature gauge needle was already climbing toward the red zone before I'd even pulled out of the parking garage. Steam began wisping from under the hood as I merged onto the nearly empty streets, heading toward home where my 4-year-old daughter Sophia waited with Mrs. Hernandez, our elderly neighbor who watched her during my night shifts. "Come on, baby," I whispered to the dashboard, patting it like I could somehow coax another few miles from the overheating engine. Just get me home to Sophia. But the car had other plans. 3 blocks into Cicero, a working-class suburb that bordered my usual route home, the temperature gauge maxed out, and steam began pouring from the hood in earnest. The engine made a grinding sound that spoke of expensive repairs I couldn't afford, then died completely as I coasted to the curb. I sat in the sudden silence, hands gripping the steering wheel as reality crashed down on me. No car meant no way to get to work. No work meant no paycheck. No paycheck meant no rent, no food, no daycare for Sophia. The cycle of poverty that I'd been fighting since her father disappeared 2 years ago threatened to drag me under once again. My phone screen showed a dead battery symbol when I tried to power it on. Of course, I'd forgotten to charge it during my shift, too focused on keeping a 60-year-old construction worker alive after his 3rd heart attack to think about my own needs. The street stretched before me, lined with modest houses that had seen better decades. Most were dark at this hour, their occupants sleeping the sleep of people with stable jobs and reliable cars. But one house, about halfway down the block, glowed with warm light from multiple windows. A black SUV sat in the driveway, its sleek surface reflecting the streetlights like obsidian. Where there was light, there might be help. And where there was an expensive car, there might be someone with enough resources to let me use their phone or call a cab. I grabbed my purse and stepped out into the cold night air, my sneakers silent against the concrete as I walked toward what I hoped would be salvation. The voices reached me before I made it to the front door. Deep, masculine tones that carried an edge I couldn't quite identify. Business being conducted at 3 a.m. My nursing instincts, honed by years of reading subtle signs of distress, whispered warnings I chose to ignore. Desperation has a way of drowning out common sense. I raised my hand to knock, then hesitated. The voices inside had grown quieter, more intense. One man was speaking rapidly in what sounded like Italian, his tone urgent. Another voice responded in English, calm but commanding, with an authority that made my spine straighten involuntarily. But Sophia's face appeared in my mind. My little girl who'd fallen asleep asking when Mama would come home, who trusted me to always find a way to take care of us both. I knocked 3 times, firm and clear. The voices inside stopped immediately. Complete silence descended, so profound I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Footsteps approached the door, measured and deliberate. A shadow moved across the peephole, pausing to study whatever they saw on the other side. The door opened slowly, revealing a man who made my breath catch in my throat. Tall and broad-shouldered, he filled the doorframe with a presence that seemed to alter the very air around him. Dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on ancient Roman coins, all sharp angles and commanding authority, but it was his eyes that stopped me cold. Blue-gray like a winter storm, they assessed me with an intensity that made me feel exposed, vulnerable, seen in ways I didn't understand. He wore an expensive suit despite the late hour, the fabric tailored to perfection across his powerful frame. A thin scar traced along his left temple, disappearing into his hairline like a question mark written in flesh. Most unsettling of all was his right hand, partially concealed behind the door in a way that suggested he held something I probably didn't want to see. "Who the hell are you and what do you want at 3 a.m.? His voice carried an accent I couldn't place, each word precisely articulated despite the obvious displeasure at being interrupted. "I'm sorry to bother you so late," I stammered, suddenly aware of how I must look. Exhausted, disheveled, still wearing scrubs that carried the antiseptic scent of the hospital. "My car broke down just up the street and my phone is dead. I saw your lights on and thought maybe I could use your phone to call for help." His eyes never left my face as I spoke, studying me with the focus of a predator evaluating potential prey. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of another man, shorter but equally well-dressed, who watched our interaction with obvious tension. "Your car," he repeated slowly, as if testing the words for truth. "Where exactly?" I pointed back toward my Honda, still visible under a streetlight with steam occasionally puffing from its hood. The Honda Civic. The engine overheated. "I'm a nurse at Mercy General. I was just trying to get home to my daughter." Something shifted in his expression at the mention of my daughter, though I couldn't interpret what it meant. He stepped back slightly, and I caught a clearer view of the interior. Expensive furnishings that seemed oddly formal for a suburban home. The shorter man near the hallway entrance, his hand resting inside his jacket, in a gesture that sent warning bells through my exhausted brain. "Vincent." The man at the door called without turning around. "We have a situation." That's when I heard it. From somewhere deeper in the house came a muffled sound that made my nursing training kick into overdrive. A groan of pain, followed by what sounded distinctly like sobbing. "Is someone hurt?" I asked automatically, taking a half step forward. "I'm a registered nurse. If someone needs medical attention—" "No." The word cut through the air like a blade. His hand moved, and I caught a glimpse of black metal before he adjusted his position to block my view. "No one here needs your help." But even as he spoke, I heard the sound again. Someone was definitely in distress, and every instinct I'd developed over 3 years of emergency medicine screamed at me to investigate. The man in front of me was clearly lying, and the expensive suit couldn't disguise the danger radiating from him like heat from a flame. I should have run, should have backed away and found another house, another solution, another way home to Sophia. Instead, I found myself staring into those storm-gray eyes and asking the question that would change everything. What's really going on here? His smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "That, little nurse, is exactly what we're about to find out." The silence that followed my question stretched like a taut wire between us. I watched his face carefully, noting the subtle tightening around his eyes, the way his jaw clenched almost imperceptibly. 3 years of reading micro-expressions in the ICU had taught me to recognize when people were deciding how much truth to reveal. "Vincent," he called again, never breaking eye contact with me. "Handle the Honda situation. Call Sal's shop, have them tow it and fix whatever's wrong." Discreetly, my heart hammered against my ribs as the reality of the situation began to crystallize. This wasn't a simple request for help anymore. These men were making decisions about my property, my life, without consulting me. The expensive suits, the late-night gathering, the obvious tension when I'd appeared at their door. All of it painted a picture I desperately didn't want to believe. "I appreciate the offer, but I can handle my own car," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If I could just use your phone to call a cab—" "No." The word cut through my sentence like a scalpel through skin. "You've seen too much already. Step inside." It wasn't a request. The man called Vincent appeared at his shoulder, confirming my worst fears. Up close, I could see the bulge of something metallic beneath his jacket, the way his eyes continuously scanned the street behind me as if expecting trouble. These weren't ordinary businessmen conducting late-night meetings. "I haven't seen anything," I insisted, taking a step backward. "I just need help with my car. I have a 4-year-old daughter waiting for me at home." "Maya Rodriguez," the imposing man at the door said quietly, and my blood turned to ice water. 26 years old, registered nurse at Mercy General Hospital. Lives at 2847 West Cermak Road, apartment 3B. Daughter Sophia, age 4. Currently in the care of Mrs. Carmen Hernandez, apartment 3A. My knees nearly buckled. He knew everything. My name, My address, my daughter's name, even Mrs. Hernandez. How was that possible? I'd never seen this man before in my life, yet he recited my personal information like reading from a file. How do you know that? I whispered, my voice barely audible above the thundering of my own heartbeat. I make it my business to know things, especially when those things walk up to my door at 3 a.m. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the interior of the house. Inside. Now. No. The word came out stronger than I felt. I'm leaving. You can keep the car help. I'll find another way home. I turned to go, but Vincent moved with fluid grace to block my path. Not touching me, not overtly threatening, but making it clear that leaving wasn't an option. Behind me, I heard the door close with a soft click that sounded like the ceiling of a tomb. Sit down, Maya. The man's voice carried an authority that made me want to obey, despite every rational thought screaming at me to run. We need to discuss why your name was already on a list in my office before you knocked on that door. My legs gave out then, and I sank onto an ornate leather sofa that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. The room around me spoke of wealth I could barely comprehend. Original artwork lined the walls, crystal decanters caught the light from an elaborate chandelier, and every surface gleamed with the patina of expensive care. What list? I managed to ask, though part of me dreaded the answer. He settled into a chair across from me, his movements controlled and predatory. Even seated, he radiated power like heat from a furnace. Tell me about your father, Maya. Diego Rodriguez. The name hit me like a physical blow. My father had died in a car accident when I was 6 years old, or at least that's what my mother had always told me. I had few memories of him. Just fragments of a man with kind eyes, who used to sing Spanish lullabies and bring me flowers from construction sites where he worked. He died when I was little, I said carefully. I don't understand what this has to do with anything. Did he? The man's smile held no warmth. Vincent, bring me the Rodriguez file. Vincent disappeared into another room, returning moments later with a manila folder thick enough to contain a novel. My captor, because that's what he was now, regardless of the expensive furnishings, opened it with deliberate slowness. Diego Rodriguez, he read aloud, accountant for Salvatore Construction and Holdings, embezzled $2 million over a 6-month period in 1999, disappeared with the money, leaving behind a wife and 6-year-old daughter. The world tilted sideways. My father hadn't died in an accident. He'd been a thief who'd abandoned us. The careful story my mother had constructed about his tragic death crumbled like paper in rain. That's impossible, I breathed. Your mother said what she needed to say to protect you both. His fingers drummed against the arm of his chair, a rhythmic sound that seemed to count down to something terrible. Diego Rodriguez stole from the Salvatore family. That money was meant to fund legitimate construction projects that employed hundreds of people. When it disappeared, those people lost their jobs. Families went hungry because of your father's greed. The Salvatore family, I repeated, pieces of a horrifying puzzle clicking into place. You're Lorenzo Salvatore. He said it like a judge pronouncing sentence. And your father's debt didn't die with him. The muffled sounds I'd heard earlier suddenly made sense. Someone else was paying for debts they probably couldn't afford, just as I was about to. The expensive suits, the late-night meeting, the casual way Vincent had moved to block my escape. This was a collection operation, and I'd walked directly into it. I don't have any money, I said desperately. I work double shifts just to pay rent. My student loans alone are $80,000. Whatever my father took, I can't pay it back. $2 million, Lorenzo said softly, plus 25 years of interest, brings the total to approximately $5.2 million. You're right, Maya. You can't pay it back. Relief and terror warred in my chest. If I couldn't pay, maybe he'd let me go. Maybe this nightmare would end, and I could return to my simple life of saving lives and raising my daughter. However, he continued, and that single word shattered my brief hope, there are other ways to settle debts. Vincent has been conducting research on all of Diego Rodriguez's remaining family members for the past 6 months. You were already scheduled for a visit next week. Scheduled for what kind of visit? But I already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. Lorenzo stood and moved to a window that overlooked the street where my broken Honda sat under a streetlight like an abandoned dream. The kind where we discuss how a young nurse might work off her father's obligations to my family. That's not legal. You can't hold someone responsible for another person's debts. His laugh was soft and infinitely more frightening than any shout would have been. Legal is a flexible concept in my world, Maya. What matters is honor, family, and the settling of accounts. Your father dishonored my family. Now you have the opportunity to restore that honor. And if I refuse? Lorenzo turned from the window, and the look in his storm-gray eyes made my mouth go dry. Then you'll discover that there are worse things than debt. And some of them involve 4-year-old girls whose mothers make poor choices. The threat to Sophia hit me like a fist to the chest. Whatever was happening here, whatever dark world I'd stumbled into, my daughter was now part of it. The man standing before me held power I couldn't comprehend, and resources I couldn't fight. He'd known my name before I'd knocked on his door, had files on my family, could reach into my life and pluck out everything that mattered to me. "What do you want?" I asked, hating how defeated I sounded. "For now?" "Cooperation. Vincent will take care of your car and ensure Mrs. Hernandez knows you'll be delayed getting home. You'll stay here until I decide how best to handle this situation." "Stay here? For how long?" Lorenzo returned to his chair, picking up a crystal glass I hadn't noticed before. The liquid inside caught the light like liquid amber. "That depends entirely on how quickly you accept that your old life ended the moment you knocked on my door, and how willing you are to embrace whatever comes next." As if to emphasize his point, another muffled cry came from deeper in the house, followed by the sound of Vincent's footsteps heading toward the basement. I was trapped in a world where debts were paid in ways I couldn't imagine, where my father's crimes had marked me as surely as if I'd committed them myself. "You're insane if you think I'll just accept this," I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. Lorenzo's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Give it time, Maya. You'll be surprised what you can accept when the alternative is losing everything you love." The penthouse elevator climbed 37 floors, each electronic chime marking another layer between me and the life I'd known just hours before. Lorenzo stood beside me in silence, his presence filling the confined space like smoke. I watched the numbers change on the digital display, counting down to whatever fate awaited me in the clouds above Chicago's loop. Vincent had assured me that Mrs. Hernandez received a call explaining I'd been delayed by car trouble and would return tomorrow evening. The lie tasted bitter in my mouth, but what choice did I have? Sophia was safe, and as long as she remained that way, I'd endure whatever came next. The elevator doors opened to reveal a hallway that belonged in an architectural magazine. Polished marble floors reflected ambient lighting that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. A single door waited at the end, its dark wood carved with intricate patterns that probably cost more than my annual salary. "Welcome to your new home," Lorenzo said, producing a keycard from his jacket. The lock responded with a soft click, and he gestured for me to enter first. The penthouse took my breath away despite my determination to remain unimpressed. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the main living area, offering a panoramic view of Chicago's skyline that made me feel suspended between earth and sky. The furnishings spoke of wealth so vast it seemed abstract. Leather sofas that looked hand-stitched in Italy, artwork that belonged in museums, a kitchen with granite countertops that gleamed like black water. "This is where you'll stay while we work out the details of your situation," Lorenzo said, removing his jacket with fluid movements that drew my attention to the powerful lines of his shoulders. Beneath the expensive suit, he moved like a predator, comfortable in his own skin. "You mean while you figure out how to use me to pay my father's debt?" I corrected, wrapping my arms around myself. The scrubs I wore felt shabby and out of place against such opulence. Among other things, he poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter, the amber liquid catching light like liquid gold. "Are you hungry? Tired?" The casual domesticity of the question caught me off guard. "I want to call my daughter." "Of course." He handed me a sleek black phone. "Vincent programmed your number. 1 call, 5 minutes. Don't say anything to alarm the child." My hands trembled as I dialed Mrs. Hernandez's number. The familiar sound of Sophia's sleepy voice nearly broke my composure. "Mama, when are you coming home?" "Soon, baby," I managed, forcing lightness into my tone. The car had some trouble, but it's being fixed. Are you being good for Mrs. H? Uh-huh. She made me chocolate milk and said I could watch cartoons until you got back. Is the car very broken? Not too broken. I should be home tomorrow evening. I love you so much, Sophia. I love you too, Mama. Don't be sad about the car. Daddy's car used to break all the time, too. The mention of her father, my ex-boyfriend who'd disappeared when Sophia was 2, sent a pang through my chest. Another man who'd left us to deal with consequences he'd created. 5 minutes, Lorenzo said quietly, tapping his watch. I have to go now, sweetheart. Be good, and I'll see you soon. Okay, Mama. Sweet dreams. The call ended, and I handed the phone back with shaking fingers. Lorenzo studied my face with those penetrating gray eyes, reading emotions I couldn't hide. She sounds like a good kid. She's everything to me, I said fiercely. If you hurt her, I don't hurt children, Maya. His voice carried something that might have been offense. Whatever you think I am, I have lines I don't cross. Then let us go. We'll disappear. Move to another city. You'll never see us again. Lorenzo's laugh held no humor. And spend the rest of my life wondering when you'll surface with information about what you've seen, when you'll decide to contact the FBI or the press. He shook his head. That's not how this works. I sank onto one of the impossibly soft sofas, exhaustion hitting me like a physical weight. So what happens now? You keep me here forever? Forever is a long time. Lorenzo settled into a chair across from me, his movements graceful despite his size. For now, you adapt. You learn how things work in my world, and you discover that cooperation brings rewards, while resistance brings consequences. Is that what happened to the man in the basement? He didn't cooperate? Something dark flickered across Lorenzo's features. Tommy owes money he can't pay, and made promises he couldn't keep. His situation is different from yours. How? I demanded, anger cutting through my fear. Because I'm a woman? Because you think you can intimidate me more easily? Because you're not a gambling addict who thinks he can outsmart the house? Lorenzo leaned forward, and I caught a glimpse of something that made my breath hitch. A thin white scar that traced along his left temple, disappearing into his hairline like a lightning bolt frozen in flesh. My nursing instincts kicked in automatically. That's a knife wound, I said without thinking. Old, but deep. You were lucky it didn't hit the temporal artery. Lorenzo's hand moved unconsciously toward the scar, then stopped. You're observant. It's my job to notice injuries. I studied the mark more carefully, noting the precise angle and depth. Whoever did that was aiming for your eye, but you moved at the last second. Very observant. His tone had changed, becoming almost contemplative. How old were you when you decided to become a nurse? The subject change caught me off balance. 16. My mother got sick, and I spent a lot of time in hospitals. I wanted to help people the way the nurses helped us. And your mother died when I was 19. Cancer. The words still hurt, even 7 years later. I was in my 2nd year of nursing school, working 3 jobs to pay tuition. Lorenzo studied me with new interest. You put yourself through school while caring for a dying parent? Someone had to. I shrugged, uncomfortable with his scrutiny. Sophia's father wasn't exactly supportive during my mother's illness. What happened to him? Found out I was pregnant and decided he wasn't ready for responsibility. The familiar anger stirred in my chest. Haven't seen him since Sophia was 2. He sends a birthday card sometimes when he remembers. So you've been raising her alone for 2 years while working full-time as a nurse. It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. Something in his tone made me defensive. I'm a good mother. Sophia is happy and healthy and loved. I'm sure she is. Lorenzo stood and moved to the windows, his silhouette outlined against the city lights. Tell me about the scar. What? You want to know how I got it. I can see it in your eyes. Professional curiosity mixed with personal interest. He turned back to me, and the vulnerability in his expression caught me completely off guard. I was 12. My father brought me to a business meeting. Said it was time I learned how the family operated. 3 men came to collect a debt he couldn't pay. My chest tightened. They hurt a child? They wanted to send a message. His fingers traced the scar again, this time deliberately. My father tried to shield me, but one of them was faster with the blade. Said it would remind me that debts always get paid, one way or another. Your father, did he survive? No. The single word held 23 years of pain. They killed him while I watched, then left me bleeding on the warehouse floor. Vincent's father found me 6 hours later. Understanding dawned with horrible clarity. That's why you do this. Why you collect debts. That's why I survive. Lorenzo returned to his chair, but the distance between us felt charged now. Electric with shared recognition of trauma survived. In my world, showing weakness gets you killed. Showing mercy gets your family killed. But you're showing me mercy, I said quietly. You could have killed me or worse when I showed up at that door. Instead, you brought me here. This isn't mercy, Maya. But something in his eyes suggested otherwise. This is insurance. Then why does it feel different? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. Lorenzo's gaze moved over my face with new intensity, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. When he spoke, his voice had dropped to almost a whisper. Because you're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone harder. Someone already corrupted by the world your father moved in. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Instead, I found someone who puts herself through hell to save strangers and raises a child alone while working 16-hour shifts. Someone who noticed a 20-year-old scar and asked about it like she actually cared about the answer. Heat crept up my neck. I do care. It's who I am. Yes, he said simply. It is. The admission created a shift in the atmosphere. Subtle but unmistakable. We were no longer just captor and prisoner, creditor and debtor. Something more complex was developing. Something that frightened me more than all his threats combined. I should show you to your room, Lorenzo said, standing abruptly as if sensing the same dangerous current. You'll want to rest before tomorrow. What happens tomorrow? His smile was enigmatic. Tomorrow, you start learning what it really means to be part of my world. 3 days passed in a strange, suspended reality. I woke each morning in a bedroom larger than my entire apartment, spoke to Sophia during carefully monitored phone calls, and spent my days navigating the invisible boundaries of my gilded cage. Lorenzo left early and returned late, conducting business I wasn't privy to, while Vincent ensured I remained safely contained 37 floors above the city. But on Thursday evening, everything changed. I was preparing dinner in the penthouse kitchen, a surreal domestic task given my circumstances, when Vincent burst through the front door with an urgency that made my blood freeze. Lorenzo, we have a problem, he called out, his usual calm completely shattered. Lorenzo emerged from his study, phone pressed to his ear. What kind of problem? Boris Kozlov's people hit Sunshine Kids Daycare an hour ago. They were after the girl. The wooden spoon fell from my nerveless fingers, clattering against the marble floor. Sophia. They'd gone after my daughter. Where is she? Lorenzo's voice had dropped to a deadly whisper, but I barely heard him over the roaring in my ears. Safe. We got there first, but barely. Had to eliminate 3 of them in the parking lot. Vincent ran a hand through his hair, leaving it disheveled. The kids scared but unhurt. Mrs. Hernandez, too. Where are they now? Secure location. Your orders? Lorenzo looked at me, taking in my frozen expression, the way my hands trembled against the kitchen counter. Bring them here. Both of them. Full protection detail. Lorenzo, the building's not... Make it secure. The authority in his voice brooked no argument. And find out how Kozlov knew about the daycare. Vincent nodded and disappeared back through the door, leaving me alone with the man whose world had just swallowed my daughter whole. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the image of armed men descending on Sophia's cheerful classroom with its finger-painted artwork and alphabet charts. They tried to take her, I whispered, my voice barely audible. They tried to take my baby. Lorenzo crossed the room in 3 strides, his hands settling on my shoulders with surprising gentleness. She's safe, Maya. Vincent got there in time. But they knew where to find her. They knew about the daycare, about Mrs. Hernandez. Horror crept up my spine as the implications became clear. This is because of me, isn't it? Because I saw too much. Because I'm here. This is because Boris Kozlov wants to hurt me. And he's decided you're the way to do it. Lorenzo's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his skin. The Russians have been pushing into our territory for months. They're using you as leverage. Let me go." The words tumbled out in a desperate rush. "Take us somewhere far away. Give us new identities. Sophia and I will disappear forever, and you'll never have to worry about us again. It's too late for that." His hands tightened on my shoulders, not painfully, but firmly enough to ground me. "They know about you now. They know about Sophia. Even if I let you go, they'd track you down and use you against me. The only way to keep you both safe is to keep you close." The elevator chimed, and I turned toward the sound with desperate hope. The doors opened to reveal Vincent, followed by Mrs. Hernandez clutching Sophia's small hand. My daughter's dark curls were mussed, her favorite pink dress wrinkled, but she appeared unharmed. The moment she saw me, she broke free and ran across the marble floor. "Mama!" she cried, launching herself into my arms with the complete trust only children possess. "There were scary men at school, but Mr. Vincent saved us." I buried my face in her hair, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo and the lingering traces of playground chalk. She was real. She was safe. She was here. "I'm so sorry, baby," I whispered against her ear. "Mama's so sorry." "It's okay, Mama. Mrs. H said sometimes grown-ups have to protect children from bad people. Are you protecting us too?" Over Sophia's head, I met Lorenzo's gaze. The intensity there made something flutter in my chest, despite everything that had happened. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm trying to protect us." Mrs. Hernandez approached more slowly, her weathered face etched with concern. "Maya, child, what's happening? Those men. They had guns. They were asking about you specifically." Before I could answer, Lorenzo stepped forward. His entire demeanor had shifted, becoming softer, more approachable. "Mrs. Hernandez, my name is Lorenzo Salvatore. Maya is under my protection because some very dangerous people are trying to hurt her. I'm sorry you were put in danger." The older woman studied him with sharp eyes that had seen decades of human nature. "You're the one keeping her here. I'm the one keeping her alive." Lorenzo's honesty was refreshing after days of careful half-truths. "As long as she's with me, no one can touch her or Sophia. And what happens when we want to leave?" Lorenzo was quiet for a long moment. "We'll discuss that when the immediate danger has passed." Mrs. Hernandez nodded slowly, apparently satisfied with his directness. "I've raised 4 children and 10 grandchildren, Mr. Salvatore. I know the difference between a protector and a predator. Don't make me regret trusting you with this family." "I won't," Lorenzo promised, and something in his voice made me believe him. Vincent cleared his throat. "Boss, we need to discuss security protocols. The building's been locked down, but later." Lorenzo's attention had shifted to Sophia, who was studying him with the fearless curiosity of a 4-year-old. "What's your name, little one?" "Sophia Rodriguez," she announced proudly. "I'm 4 years old and I know all my colors in English and Spanish. Mama taught me." "That's very impressive. I'm Lorenzo. This is my home and you're very welcome here." "It's really big," Sophia observed, craning her neck to take in the soaring ceilings. "Do you live here all by yourself?" "Usually. But now I have guests, which makes it much more interesting." Sophia giggled, already charmed. "Mama says I'm interesting too. Sometimes too interesting." "I can believe that." Lorenzo's smile was genuine, transforming his entire face. "Are you hungry? I think we can find something good in the kitchen." As he led Sophia away, chatting easily about her favorite foods and cartoons, Mrs. Hernandez moved to stand beside me. "He's not what I expected," she said quietly. "What did you expect?" "A monster. Someone who would terrify a child." She watched Lorenzo lift Sophia onto a bar stool with careful hands, his entire focus on making her comfortable. Instead, I see a man who's trying very hard not to let his own darkness touch something innocent. "You think he's genuinely trying to protect us?" "I think he's in love with you," Mrs. Hernandez said simply. "And I think that scares him more than any enemy ever could." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I wanted to deny it, to insist that whatever was developing between Lorenzo and me was just Stockholm Syndrome or desperation. But as I watched him patiently answer Sophia's endless questions while Vincent discussed security measures in low tones, I couldn't ignore the truth. Something had shifted between us over the past 3 days. The careful distance we'd maintained was crumbling, replaced by a dangerous intimacy that grew stronger each time our eyes met across the penthouse. I'd caught him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking, his expression unguarded and hungry, and I'd found myself responding to his presence in ways that terrified me. "Maya," Lorenzo's voice drew me from my thoughts. "We need to talk. About Boris Kozlov. About what this means for your safety." I nodded, following him to the study while Mrs. Hernandez supervised Sophia's impromptu snack. The moment the door closed behind us, Lorenzo's careful composure cracked. "I should have anticipated this," he said, running both hands through his dark hair. "Should have known they'd use you to get to me." "How could you have known?" "I didn't even know I existed in your world until 3 days ago. Because you matter to me." The admission hung between us like a confession. And in my world, caring about someone makes them a target. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Lorenzo, I know it's insane. I know it makes no sense." He turned to face me, and the vulnerability in his gray eyes made my breath catch. "But somewhere between watching you worry about that scar and seeing you comfort your daughter, you became more than just Diego Rodriguez's debt to me. What am I then?" He crossed the room slowly, his movements predatory and graceful. When he reached me, his hands came up to frame my face with shocking gentleness. "You're the first person in 23 years who's made me want to be better than what I am." The kiss was inevitable, had been building since that first night when I'd foolishly knocked on his door. His lips were warm and firm, moving against mine with a hunger that stole my breath and ignited something desperate in my chest. I should have pushed him away. Should have remembered that he was dangerous, that he held my life and Sophia's in his hands. Instead, I kissed him back with equal desperation, my fingers tangling in his hair, as every rational thought dissolved into sensation and need. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. "This is crazy," I whispered against his lips. "Completely insane," he agreed, but his arms tightened around me. And I don't care anymore. Neither did I. And that realization terrified me more than all of Boris Kozlov's threats combined. The photograph fell from my trembling fingers like a lead weight, hitting the marble floor with a sharp crack that echoed through Lorenzo's study. Staring up at me was my father's face. Younger than I remembered, but unmistakably Diego Rodriguez. He stood beside 2 other men in what appeared to be a construction office, all 3 smiling at the camera like old friends celebrating a successful project. But it was the date stamp in the corner that made my world tilt sideways. March 15th, 2019. 6 months ago. My father, who I'd been told died in a car accident when I was 6 years old, had been alive just months ago. "Where did you get this?" My voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Lorenzo stood behind his desk, his face carved from stone. Between us lay scattered evidence of a truth that demolished everything I thought I knew about my life. Bank records, surveillance photos, witness statements. A paper trail that painted my father not as the victim of a tragic accident, but as a man who'd lived freely for 20 years while his family believed him dead. "My investigators found him 3 months ago," Lorenzo said quietly, "living under the name David Reyes in Phoenix, Arizona. Married to another woman. 2 teenage sons." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not only had my father abandoned us and stolen from Lorenzo's family, but he'd been living an entirely new life while my mother struggled through cancer treatments alone, while I dropped out of nursing school to care for her, while I raised Sophia as a single mother, working double shifts just to survive. He let us think he was dead. The words scraped my throat raw. My mother died believing she was a widow. I grew up without a father because he chose to disappear rather than face the consequences of what he'd done. "Maya, no." I backed away from the desk, from the photographs, from the man whose gray eyes held too much pity. "You knew. All this time. You knew he was alive and you didn't tell me. I was protecting you. By lying to me?" My voice rose. Years of buried grief and anger finally finding a target. "Just like my mother lied to me? Just like everyone in my life has lied to me?" Lorenzo moved around the desk slowly, his hands raised in a gesture of peace that only inflamed my rage. "Your mother was protecting a 6-year-old child from an ugly truth. I was protecting a woman He stopped himself, but the unfinished sentence hung between us like a loaded weapon. "A woman you what, Lorenzo? Care about? Love?" I laughed bitterly. You don't love someone and lie to them about their entire life. You don't love someone and use their father's crimes as leverage to control them. That's not what this is anymore, and you know it. Do I? I grabbed one of the surveillance photos from the desk. My father at a barbecue, arm around a woman who wasn't my mother, laughing with children who weren't me. Because from where I'm standing, this looks exactly like manipulation. You've known he was alive for months, but you waited until after we kissed to tell me. Until after I started developing feelings for you. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. The timing wasn't calculated? Strategic? I threw the photo at his chest, watching it flutter to the floor between us. Of course it was. Everything about you is calculated. This whole situation, bringing me here, making me dependent on you, it's all been one elaborate game. That's not true. Isn't it? I spun away from him, needing distance before I did something stupid like cry or throw something more substantial than a photograph. Tell me honestly, Lorenzo. If my father is alive and has been for 20 years, why am I still here? Why aren't you going after him instead of holding his daughter hostage? The silence that followed was deafening. When I finally turned back to face him, Lorenzo's expression had shuttered completely, becoming the cold mask he'd worn that first night. Because Diego Rodriguez is already dead, he said finally. I killed him 5 months ago. The world stopped spinning. My ears rang with white noise, and for a moment I thought I might faint. What? I found him in Phoenix, confronted him about the stolen money, about abandoning his family. Lorenzo's voice was completely devoid of emotion. He begged for his life, said he had children who needed him, a wife who depended on him. He offered to work off the debt, to make restitution. But you killed him anyway. It wasn't a question. Yes. The single word hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. All the air left my lungs in a painful rush, and I had to grip the back of a chair to keep from collapsing. Why? I managed to ask. If he was willing to pay you back. Because 20 years ago, the money he stole was meant for a children's hospital in Little Italy. Lorenzo's facade cracked slightly, revealing something raw underneath. 36 children died that winter because the hospital couldn't afford proper equipment and medications. Diego Rodriguez played poker and drank expensive whiskey while kids suffered because of his greed. I closed my eyes, trying to process the magnitude of what he was telling me. My father hadn't just been a thief. He'd been responsible for children's deaths, and the man I'd been falling for had executed him for it. The worst part, Lorenzo continued, his voice barely audible, is that he never once asked about you or your mother during our final conversation. 20 years of wondering, and he never cared enough to find out if you were alive or dead. The cruelty of that truth cut deeper than the revelation of his murder. My father had chosen his new family over his old one so completely that we'd become less than memories to him. That's why you targeted me, I said, understanding flooding through me like ice water. Not because of some 20-year-old debt, but because you wanted me to know what kind of man he really was. You wanted me to suffer for his sins. No, Lorenzo stepped toward me, but I held up a hand to stop him. At first, yes, I wanted the Rodriguez family to understand the consequences of Diego's choices. But then I met you, and everything changed. Everything changed, I repeated mockingly. How convenient. The big bad mafia boss suddenly grows a conscience when faced with an innocent woman and her child. Maya, please. Don't. The word came out sharp enough to cut. Don't you dare ask me to understand or forgive this. You killed my father, however terrible he was, and then you seduced me with lies and half-truths. I never lied about my feelings for you. Your feelings? I laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. You don't have feelings, Lorenzo. You have strategies. You have objectives. You have ways of getting what you want from people who are too stupid or desperate to see through you. The accusation hung between us like a blade. Lorenzo's face went completely white, then flushed with anger so intense I took an involuntary step backward. If that's what you truly believe, he said quietly, then perhaps it's time we discuss new arrangements for you and Sophia. What kind of arrangements? The kind where you get exactly what you've been asking for since the moment you arrived. His voice was deadly calm now, more frightening than any show of temper. Vincent is arranging a secure house outside the city. You and Sophia will be relocated there tonight, along with Mrs. Hernandez. Full protection detail, but no contact with me. Relief and terror warred in my chest. For how long? Until Boris Kozlov is eliminated and the threat to your safety ends. Lorenzo returned to his desk, his movements precise and controlled. After that, new identities, relocation to whatever city you choose, and enough money to ensure you never have to worry about supporting your daughter again. It was everything I'd asked for, everything I'd demanded. So why did it feel like a death sentence? And in the meantime, I'm supposed to just sit in some safe house and wait for you to solve all my problems? You're supposed to stay alive. Lorenzo sat down and opened a file, effectively dismissing me, which is more consideration than your father ever showed his family. The comparison was a knife between my ribs. I wanted to argue, to fight, to demand he look at me instead of those damned papers. But what was the point? He'd shown me his true nature, and I'd shown him mine. We were strangers again, bound only by circumstances neither of us had chosen. When do we leave? I asked. Tonight. Vincent will handle the details. I waited for him to say something else, to acknowledge what we'd shared over the past week. But Lorenzo had already retreated behind the walls that protected him from the world, and I was no longer welcome inside. Fine. I walked to the door on unsteady legs, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. But I want you to know something, Lorenzo. He looked up then, and for just a moment, I saw a flash of the vulnerable man who'd kissed me like I was his salvation. I could have forgiven you for killing my father. I could have even understood it, given what you told me about those children. I met his eyes directly, letting him see the pain he'd caused. But I'll never forgive you for making me believe that what we had was real. The last thing I saw before I closed the door behind me was Lorenzo's face crumbling like a building under demolition, all his careful control finally giving way to devastation. But I didn't stop to comfort him. Some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness, and some truths arrived too late to matter. In the living room, Sophia was building a tower out of blocks, while Mrs. Hernandez watched from the sofa, her weathered face creased with concern. My daughter looked up when I entered, her dark eyes bright with innocent trust. Mama, are we going on another adventure? I knelt beside her and gathered her into my arms, breathing in her familiar scent and trying not to think about all the ways this would change her life. Yes, baby, I whispered against her hair. We're going somewhere safe. Will Lorenzo come with us? The question was like a dagger through my heart. No, sweetheart. Lorenzo has other things he needs to do. Oh, Sophia considered this with 4-year-old seriousness. Will we see him again? I closed my eyes, holding my daughter tighter. I don't think so, Sophia. I don't think we will. The safe house sat nestled among towering pines in the Wisconsin countryside, an hour's drive from the nearest town. It looked like something from a vacation rental website. Rustic charm with modern amenities, wraparound porch, and windows that framed the surrounding forest like living paintings. Under different circumstances, I might have called it beautiful. Instead, it felt like an expensive prison. 2 weeks had passed since that devastating confrontation in Lorenzo's study. 2 weeks of watching Sophia adapt to our new reality with the resilience only children possess, while Mrs. Hernandez maintained a careful neutrality that spoke volumes about her own conflicted feelings. 2 weeks of staring out those picturesque windows and wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Mama, can we go pick berries today? Sophia asked from her spot at the breakfast table, her small fingers wrapped around a cup of hot chocolate. I saw some growing by the big rock yesterday. Maybe later, sweetheart, I replied automatically, my attention focused on the security monitors Vincent had installed in every room. The screens showed empty forest paths and the occasional deer, but I'd learned not to trust appearances. You've been saying, maybe later for 3 days, Mrs. Hernandez observed from her place at the kitchen counter. Her tone was mild, but I caught the concern underneath. The child needs fresh air and exercise. The child needs to stay safe. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, and I immediately regretted them when Sophia's face fell. I'm sorry, baby, I said, kneeling beside her chair. Mama's just worried about keeping us protected. How about we build that fort in the living room you've been asking about? Sophia nodded, but her enthusiasm was dimmed. At 4 years old, she didn't understand why we'd left the exciting penthouse for this isolated house. why Lorenzo no longer joined us for dinner, why Mama spent so much time staring out windows with shadows under her eyes. That afternoon, while Sophia napped and Mrs. Hernandez tended her small herb garden on the back porch, Vincent arrived for his daily security briefing. His presence had become routine, checking perimeters, updating protocols, delivering supplies from the city. But today something was different about his usual professional demeanor. "How's Lorenzo?" The question slipped out before I could stop myself. Vincent paused in his inspection of the alarm system, his dark eyes meeting mine with surprising directness. "Not good." "What do you mean, not good?" "He hasn't slept in 5 days, barely eating. Spends most of his time in that study, staring at those photos of your father like they might reveal some secret he missed." Vincent's voice carried a frustration I'd never heard before. "Yesterday I found him sitting in his car outside Sophia's old daycare at 3 a.m, just watching the empty building. My chest tightened painfully. That doesn't concern me, doesn't it?" Vincent stepped closer, and I saw something like anger flash across his features. "Because the Maya Rodriguez I met 2 weeks ago wouldn't have been able to sit in this house for 14 days, knowing the man she loves is falling apart without her. I don't love him." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. "Right. That's why you ask about him every day. That's why you haven't touched the new identity papers I brought last week, or made any plans to leave once this is over." I turned away from his penetrating stare. But Vincent wasn't finished. "Do you know what he did 3 nights ago? I told you, I don't—" Boris Kozlov reached out through intermediaries, offered to end the territorial war in exchange for one thing. My blood turned cold. "What thing?" "You." The simple word hit me like a physical blow. I sank onto the sofa, suddenly unable to support my own weight. "Kozlov wants you delivered to him within 72 hours, or he'll escalate his attacks on Salvatore operations. Hit our legitimate businesses, target family members, make it a bloodbath that draws federal attention." Vincent sat across from me, his expression grave. "You know what Lorenzo's response was?" I shook my head, not trusting my voice. "War. Total, uncompromising war. He'd rather watch his empire burn than hand you over to a man who would torture you to death just to prove a point." Tears stung my eyes. He should have taken the deal. "Should he?" Vincent leaned forward. "Tell me honestly, Maya, knowing what you know about Boris Kozlov, about what happens to women who fall into his hands, should Lorenzo have traded your life for peace?" The question hung between us like a challenge. I thought about the surveillance photos Vincent had shown me weeks ago, the grainy images of Kozlov's previous victims. Women who'd been found in pieces, their bodies bearing evidence of prolonged torture that had been intended as messages to their loved ones. "That's not the point," I said weakly. "Isn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like Lorenzo is choosing to protect the woman he loves over the empire he spent 20 years building. And instead of recognizing that sacrifice, you're hiding in the woods feeling sorry for yourself. He lied to me, Vincent. About everything. He lied about your father being dead when Diego was already 6 feet under. He kept the details of that execution from you until you demanded the truth." Vincent's voice softened slightly. "Trust me, Maya. I was there that night in Phoenix. I saw Lorenzo's face when he pulled the trigger. Killing your father nearly destroyed him. Not because he felt guilty about the act, but because he knew it would hurt you eventually. Then why do it? Because 36 children died, and someone had to answer for that. Because in our world, debts get paid one way or another, and blood is the only currency that matters." Vincent ran a hand through his hair, but mostly because Lorenzo is his father's son, and his father taught him that justice matters more than mercy. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of truths I wasn't ready to accept. "It doesn't change what he did." "No, it doesn't. But it might change what you do next." Before I could ask what he meant, the sound of a vehicle approaching made us both freeze. Vincent was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the weapon concealed under his jacket. "Stay here," he ordered, moving toward the window. "Keep Sophia and Mrs. Hernandez away from the front of the house." But as he peered through the curtains, his posture relaxed slightly. "It's Anya." I recognized the name. One of Lorenzo's trusted associates, a woman whose icy efficiency had always intimidated me. Vincent opened the door to admit her, and I saw immediately that something was wrong. Anya's usually pristine appearance was disheveled, her face pale with what looked like genuine fear. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. Boris moved up his timeline. "He has Mrs. Hernandez." The world tilted sideways. "What are you talking about?" "Mrs. Hernandez is on the back porch." Anya shook her head grimly. "Check again." I ran through the house, calling Mrs. Hernandez's name, but found only her abandoned herb basket and an open back door. No sign of struggle, no indication of violence, just absence where a beloved presence should have been. "How?" I demanded when I returned to the living room. "This place is supposed to be secure." "Anya was feeding information to the Russians," Vincent said quietly, his gun now pointed at the blonde woman's chest. "Weren't you, Anya?" To her credit, Anya didn't try to deny it. "Kozlov has my younger sister. Has had her for 3 months. Every piece of information I provided was payment toward her release. And now? Now he's tired of games. He wants Maya, and he's offering a trade. Mrs. Hernandez for Maya Rodriguez. The exchange happens tonight at the warehouse district. Pier 7. "Absolutely not," Vincent said immediately. "Lorenzo would never authorize." "Lorenzo doesn't know yet," Anya interrupted. "Kozlov's message was delivered directly to Maya. The choice is hers to make." They both looked at me expectantly, waiting for a decision that would define everything that came next. In the background, I could hear Sophia stirring from her nap, calling for Mrs. Hernandez in a sleepy voice that broke my heart. "If I don't go, he'll kill her," I said. "If you do go, he'll kill you both," Vincent countered. "This isn't a trade, Maya. It's an execution with extra steps." "Then what would you have me do? Let an innocent woman die because I'm too scared to face the consequences of my choices? I'd have you trust that Lorenzo will find another way. He always does." I walked to the window and stared out at the forest that had become my cage. Somewhere in the city, Mrs. Hernandez was being held by a monster who would torture her just to draw me out. Somewhere else, Lorenzo was probably planning a war that would leave bodies in the streets and innocents in the crossfire. Both options led to blood and suffering, but only one gave me the chance to save someone I loved. "Call Lorenzo," I said finally. "Tell him I'm coming back to Chicago, and that I want to discuss terms for ending this war. Maya, tell him I choose him, Vincent. Tell him I choose us." I turned to face them both, and I saw Vincent's eyes widen at whatever he saw in my expression. But this time, we do things my way. For the first time since I'd known him, Vincent smiled. "Yes, ma'am. I'll make the call." As he stepped outside to contact Lorenzo, I went to wake Sophia from her nap. Whatever came next, we would face it together. All of us. As the family we'd somehow become despite every obstacle that had tried to tear us apart. The war for our future was about to begin, and I was finally ready to fight. The warehouse district at night looked like a graveyard of Chicago's industrial past. Abandoned buildings stretched along the river like broken teeth, their shattered windows reflecting the few working streetlights that hadn't been shot out by years of gang warfare. The smell of rust and decay hung heavy in the October air, mixing with the distant scent of the lake to create an atmosphere that felt like death itself. I crouched behind a stack of shipping containers with Lorenzo at my side, both of us dressed in black tactical gear that made us nearly invisible in the shadows. My hands were steady as I checked the medical supplies in my pack one final time. Field dressings, morphine, clotting agents, everything I might need if this went as badly as we all expected it would. "You don't have to do this," Lorenzo whispered, his voice barely audible even at close range. "Vincent can handle the medical support." "Vincent isn't a trained nurse," I replied quietly, adjusting the earpiece that connected me to the rest of his team. "And Mrs. Hernandez trusts me. If she's hurt, she'll need someone familiar to keep her calm." Through the green tint of my night vision goggles, I could see Lorenzo's jaw tighten. The past 6 hours had been a whirlwind of preparation and strategy. But underneath all the tactical planning, tension crackled between us like a live wire. Our confrontation 2 weeks ago remained unresolved, buried beneath the immediate crisis, but not forgotten. "Positions," Vincent's voice crackled through our comms. "Boss, you've got movement on the north side. 4 vehicles, headlights off." "Copy that." Lorenzo touched his throat mic. "Maya, remember the plan. You stay behind cover until we confirm Mrs. Hernandez's location. No heroics. I nodded, though every instinct I'd developed as a nurse screamed at me to rush toward anyone who might need help. But this wasn't the sterile environment of a hospital emergency room. This was war, and the wrong move could get us all killed. Boris Kozlov had chosen Pier 7 for good reason. The long concrete structure jutted into the Chicago River like a finger pointing toward downtown, offering clear sightlines in all directions while limiting approach routes. Stacks of shipping containers created a maze of potential hiding spots, but they also provided cover for snipers and ambush points. Target acquired, came another voice through the comm system, one of Lorenzo's men positioned on a nearby rooftop. I've got eyes on an elderly woman, mid-60s, gray hair. She's tied to a chair about 50 meters from the end of the pier. My heart clenched. Mrs. Hernandez, the woman who'd been like a grandmother to Sophia, who'd never asked for anything more than the chance to help a struggling young mother. Now she was bait in a trap, designed to destroy the people she'd come to care about. How many hostiles? Lorenzo asked. Minimum 8 that I can see. Probably more in the containers. And boss, the sniper's voice carried a note of concern. Kozlov's got something with him. Looks like a child. The blood drained from my face as the implications hit me. Sophia? Negative. Vincent's voice cut through my panic. Sophia's secure at the backup location with our people, but there's definitely a kid down there. Anya's sister, I realized. He brought both hostages. Lorenzo's curse was creative and vicious. This changes everything. Vincent, redeploy teams 2 and 3 to cover potential civilian casualties. Rules of engagement are now extreme prejudice. If anyone so much as breathes wrong near those hostages, put them down. Copy that, boss. I checked my watch. 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes until the scheduled exchange time. In the distance, I could see figures moving around the pier, setting up their own positions. Boris Kozlov wasn't taking any chances either. Maya. Lorenzo's hand found mine in the darkness, his fingers threading through my own with desperate intensity. If this goes sideways, it won't. If it does, he continued, ignoring my interruption, I need you to know that everything I told you in that study was true. About your father. About why I had to kill him. About how I feel about you. I've never lied about my feelings. I squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm that spoke of a life lived with weapons and violence. I know, and I need you to know that I forgive you. For all of it. His sharp intake of breath was audible even over the comm static. Maya? Movement on the pier, Vincent interrupted. 3 figures approaching the hostages. One matches Kozlov's description. Lorenzo released my hand and raised his rifle, the weapon an extension of his body after decades of practice. All teams, final weapons check. We go on my mark. Through my scope, I could see Boris Kozlov clearly now. He was smaller than I'd expected. Compact and wiry, with the kind of predatory grace that spoke of extreme danger in a deceptively modest package. His silver hair was slicked back from a face that might have been handsome, if not for the complete absence of humanity in his pale eyes. Mrs. Hernandez sat slumped in the chair beside him, her head hanging forward in a way that made my medical training scream warnings. Either unconscious or worse. 20 feet away, a small figure that had to be Anya's sister huddled against a shipping container, clearly terrified but apparently unharmed. Vincent, can you get a clean shot on Kozlov without endangering the hostages? Negative. Too much risk of overpenetration or deflection. We need them separated. Then we do this the hard way. Lorenzo's voice carried the cold certainty of a man who'd made similar calculations countless times before. Maya, I'm going out there to negotiate. When I give the signal, you move fast to the hostages and get them clear. That's suicide. He'll kill you the moment you show yourself. Maybe. But it's the only play that gives those women a chance. Lorenzo turned to look at me. And even through the night vision equipment, I could see the determination in his eyes. This is what I do, Maya. This is who I am. Before I could argue, he was moving, emerging from our hiding spot with his hands visible, but his finger never far from his weapon's trigger. I watched through my scope as he walked calmly across the open ground toward the pier, every step measured and deliberate. Boris, Lorenzo called out when he was 50 feet away. Let's discuss terms. Kozlov's laughter echoed across the water like breaking glass. Lorenzo Salvatore, the great prince of Chicago, come to negotiate for his whore and an old woman. The old woman never did anything to you. Let her go, and we can settle this between us. Settle this. Kozlov gestured expansively with a pistol that gleamed silver in the moonlight. You think this is about territory? About business? He backhanded Mrs. Hernandez across the face, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from crying out. This is about respect. About showing the entire city what happens when someone thinks they can defy Boris Kozlov. Then show them. Lorenzo took another step forward. Kill me, and let the innocents walk away. Oh, I'm going to kill you. Kozlov agreed conversationally. But first, you're going to watch me break your woman piece by piece, starting with her fingers. He raised the pistol toward Mrs. Hernandez's hand, and time seemed to slow to a crawl. I saw Lorenzo's muscles coil, preparing to make a desperate charge across 50 feet of open ground. I saw the other Russian soldiers starting to raise their weapons. I saw Anya's sister cowering against the shipping container, tears streaming down her young face. And I made a choice that would have horrified every tactical instructor who'd ever lived. Stop, I called out, standing up from behind cover with my hands raised. I'm here. Let's make the trade. Maya, no. Lorenzo's shout carried anguish and fury in equal measure. But I was already walking toward the pier, my medical bag slung over my shoulder, and my heart hammering against my ribs. Behind me, I could hear frantic chatter on the comm system, as Vincent and the others tried to adjust their positions to cover my insane gambit. Now this is interesting, Kozlov mused as I approached. The legendary Maya Rodriguez, walking into the lion's den to save an old woman and a child she's never met. His smile was sharp enough to cut glass. How wonderfully American of you. I'm here, I said, stopping 20 feet away. Release them, and you can have whatever revenge you want against me. Can I? Kozlov circled around behind Mrs. Hernandez's chair like a shark scenting blood. Because what I want is to watch Lorenzo Salvatore suffer. And the best way to make him suffer is to hurt what he loves most. The pistol swung toward me, and I saw my death approaching at 200 feet per second. But in that suspended moment before chaos erupted, I met Lorenzo's eyes across the distance and mouthed 3 words that I'd never had the courage to say aloud. I love you. The shot, when it came, was deafeningly loud in the confines of the pier. But the bullet that should have ended my life instead sparked off the concrete beside Boris Kozlov's feet as Vincent's sniper rifle spoke from the darkness. And then hell descended upon Pier 7 with a vengeance that would become legend in Chicago's underworld for decades to come. Gunfire erupted from every direction as Lorenzo's teams opened up with coordinated precision. Muzzle flashes lit the night like deadly fireworks, and the air filled with the whine of ricochets and the sharp crack of high-velocity ammunition finding targets. I threw myself toward Mrs. Hernandez, my medical training overriding every survival instinct as I focused on reaching the injured woman. Bullets whined over my head, and I felt the heat of one pass close enough to singe my hair, but nothing mattered except getting to someone who needed help. Mrs. Shh! I shouted over the gunfire, sliding on my knees across the concrete to reach her chair. Can you hear me? Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, but alive. Blood trickled from her split lip, and I could see bruising around her wrists where the ropes had cut into her skin, but she was conscious and breathing. Maya, she whispered. Child, what are you doing here? Getting you home, I promised, pulling out a knife to cut her bonds. Hold on to me. But as I helped her to her feet, a shadow fell across us both. Boris Kozlov stood 5 feet away, his pistol trained on my chest, and madness dancing in his pale eyes. You stupid little bitch, he snarled. Did you really think you could walk into my operation and play hero? I think she just did. Lorenzo's voice came from directly behind him. Kozlov spun around, but Lorenzo was already moving, his combat knife finding the Russian's throat in one smooth motion that spoke of decades of lethal experience. Blood sprayed across the pier as Kozlov dropped to his knees, his hands clutching futilely at the wound that had severed his carotid artery. That's for threatening my family, Lorenzo said quietly, and pulled the blade free. The gunfire was already tapering off, as Vincent's team systematically eliminated the remaining Russian soldiers. In the sudden relative quiet, I could hear Anya's sister sobbing with relief as one of Lorenzo's men cut her free from her restraints. "Maya," Mrs. Hernandez said weakly, leaning heavily against my shoulder. "I think I might need a doctor." "You've got one," I assured her, already assessing her injuries with professional efficiency. "Mild concussion, possible cracked ribs, definitely dehydrated. But you're going to be fine. And the little girl?" I looked over at Anya's sister, who was being wrapped in a blanket by one of the tactical team members. "She's safe too. We're all safe." Lorenzo appeared at my side, his face streaked with blood that wasn't his own, and his eyes holding an intensity that made my breath catch. "Are you hurt?" "No. You?" "I'll live." He knelt beside Mrs. Hernandez, his entire demeanor shifting from lethal predator to gentle protector. "Mrs. H, I'm sorry you got dragged into this. It was never supposed to happen." The elderly woman studied his face with sharp eyes despite her injuries. "You came for me." "Of course I did. Your family. And Maya? What is she to you?" Lorenzo looked at me, and the vulnerability in his expression took my breath away. "Everything. She's everything." As sirens wailed in the distance, Vincent had clearly called in favors to ensure the right people responded to the scene. I helped Mrs. Hernandez toward the waiting vehicles that would take us away from this place of violence and back to something resembling safety. But as we walked away from the pier where Boris Kozlov's blood was already being washed away by the river current, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I'd chosen Lorenzo's world, chosen to fight for the people I loved, and there would be no going back to the simple life of a struggling single mother. The war was over. Our new life was just beginning. 6 months later, I stood in the marble foyer of our new home in Lake Forest, watching through the tall windows as Sophia played in the enclosed garden with Mrs. Hernandez. My daughter's laughter carried on the spring breeze, pure and joyful in a way that still caught me off guard after everything we'd been through. She was building fairy houses from twigs and flowers, completely absorbed in her imaginary world, where the greatest danger was a bumblebee landing too close to her picnic blanket. The transition hadn't been seamless. Those first weeks after the pier shootout had been a careful dance of healing, physical wounds for Mrs. Hernandez, emotional ones for all of us. Sophia had asked dozens of questions about why we'd moved again, why Lorenzo was suddenly around all the time, why Mama seemed different somehow. I'd answered them as honestly as a 4-year-old could understand, watching her process the information with that remarkable adaptability children possess. "She's gotten taller," Lorenzo observed, joining me at the window. He was dressed casually today, jeans and a navy sweater that made his gray eyes look like storm clouds. The formal suits had given way to a more relaxed wardrobe, as he'd gradually shifted away from the day-to-day operations that had once consumed his life. "All the good food you keep bringing home," I said, smiling as I watched Sophia carefully arrange rose petals around her latest creation. "Mrs. H swears she's going to spoil us all beyond recognition." "Is that such a terrible thing?" I leaned into his side, feeling the solid warmth of him against my shoulder. "No, it's not terrible at all. The past 6 months had been a revelation, in ways I couldn't have imagined." Lorenzo had kept his promise about legitimizing the family businesses, using the chaos following Boris Kozlov's death to restructure operations and eliminate the most dangerous elements. Construction, real estate development, import, export. All legal, all profitable, all carefully removed from the violence that had once defined his world. It hadn't been easy. Some of his father's old associates had balked at the changes, viewing them as weakness. Those men had been given generous severance packages and escorted to airports with one-way tickets to cities far from Chicago. The message had been clear: adapt to the new reality, or find a new life elsewhere. "Vincent called while you were at the hospital," Lorenzo said, pulling me from my thoughts. "The last of the New York families have agreed to the territorial boundaries. No more disputes about the docks." I nodded, though the complexity of mafia politics still felt foreign to me, despite months of careful education. "That's good. And Anya's sister?" "Started classes at Northwestern last week. Pre-law, just like she wanted." Lorenzo's smile held genuine warmth. Anya says she's considering changing her last name to distance herself from the Russian connections. The redemption of Anya Volkov had been one of the more surprising developments of recent months. The woman who'd betrayed us to save her sister had proven her loyalty through actions rather than words, using her knowledge of Russian operations to help Lorenzo's transition to legitimacy. She now ran security for our various business interests, her icy competence redirected toward protecting rather than destroying. Dr. Martinez wants to discuss my schedule again, I said, changing the subject to something more immediately relevant. The trauma center is requesting more hours. And what do you want? It was a question Lorenzo asked frequently, part of his ongoing effort to ensure I never felt trapped or coerced in our new life together. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd once held me against my will now went to almost comical lengths to guarantee my freedom of choice. I want to help more people, I admitted. But I also want to be here when Sophia gets home from school. I want to have dinner with you without checking my phone every 5 minutes for emergency calls. Then tell Dr. Martinez you'll do 3 days a week, not 5. The hospital needs good trauma nurses, but Sophia needs her mother more. And what about what you need? Lorenzo turned to face me fully, his hands coming up to frame my face with the gentle reverence that still surprised me after all these months. I need you happy. I need Sophia healthy and safe. I need Mrs. Hernandez to keep making those incredible Sunday dinners that are going to require me to buy bigger suits. His thumb traced along my cheekbone. Everything else is negotiable. The engagement ring on my left hand caught the afternoon sunlight, sending tiny rainbows across the marble floor. Lorenzo had proposed 3 months ago, not with grand gestures or public declarations, but quietly, privately, in the kitchen, while I was making pancakes for Sophia's birthday breakfast. He'd simply knelt beside my chair and asked if I would do him the honor of becoming his wife, his voice rough with emotion I'd never heard from him before. I'd said yes before he'd finished the question. Speaking of negotiations, I said, sliding my arms around his neck. Sophia's been asking about whether she can have a baby brother or sister. Lorenzo's eyes widened. Has she now? Very specifically. She wants to know if you and I are going to have a baby together, or if we need to adopt one like her friend Emma's parents did. I grinned at his expression. I told her these things take time and planning. Wise answer. His hand settled at my waist, pulling me closer. And what did you tell her about timing? That we'd discuss it after the wedding. I paused, studying his face. Unless you're having second thoughts about marrying a woman with so much baggage. Maya Rodriguez, Lorenzo said seriously. You walked into my life through a broken-down car and a door I shouldn't have opened. You saved me from becoming the kind of man my father was, helped me build something better than what I inherited, and showed me what it means to love someone more than power, or money, or respect. His voice dropped to a whisper. If anyone should be worried about second thoughts, it's you. Never, I said firmly. I choose you, Lorenzo Salvatore. I choose this life, this family, this beautiful chaos we've created together. The kiss that followed was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening and Sophia's voice calling through the house. Mama, Lorenzo, come see what Mrs. H and I made in the garden. We broke apart, both laughing at her perfect timing. Lorenzo took my hand, threading our fingers together as we walked toward the garden door, where our daughter waited with grass stains on her knees and dirt under her fingernails, proudly displaying a bouquet of wildflowers that probably violated several landscaping principles. It's beautiful, baby, I said, accepting the slightly wilted offering with appropriate reverence. It's for your wedding, Sophia announced importantly. Mrs. H says brides need flowers, and store flowers are boring. Garden flowers have more love in them. Over her head, Lorenzo and I exchanged a look that held months of shared understanding, quiet moments of building trust, and the kind of deep contentment that comes from finding your place in the world. Garden flowers it is, Lorenzo agreed solemnly. We wouldn't want a boring wedding. That evening, after Sophia had been bathed and read to and tucked into her bed in the room she'd decorated with princess stickers and photographs of our makeshift family, I found Lorenzo in his study. But instead of the grim business meetings that had once filled his evenings, he was reviewing architectural plans for a new children's wing at Mercy General Hospital, a project funded entirely by Salvatore Holdings and dedicated to the memory of 36 children who died because a selfish man had stolen money, meant to save them. "How does it look?" I asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Like something that might actually make a difference." He rolled up the blueprints carefully. "The contractor says it'll be ready by Christmas." "Diego would have approved," I said quietly. Lorenzo looked up, surprise flickering across his features. It was the first time I'd voluntarily mentioned my father since that devastating confrontation months ago. "Do you really think so?" "The man I remember from childhood stories." "Yes, he loved kids. Always brought me little presents. Used to talk about making the world better for the next generation." I shrugged. "Whatever he became later, whoever he chose to be when he stole from you, that wasn't the father I loved. This hospital wing honors the memory of who he should have been." Lorenzo stood and moved around the desk, pulling me to my feet and into his arms. "I love you, Maya Rodriguez. More than I thought it was possible to love another person. Soon to be Maya Salvatore," I corrected, pressing a kiss to the scar on his temple that had become as familiar to me as my own reflection. "Soon," he agreed, "though I have to warn you, being married to me comes with certain occupational hazards." "Such as?" "Vincent wants to throw us an engagement party that would make the mayor jealous. Mrs. Hernandez has been secretly planning a wedding menu for 3 months. And Sophia has informed me that she expects to be the most important person in the wedding party, which means we'll probably need to design the entire ceremony around her preferences." I laughed, imaging our 4-year-old directing a formal wedding with the same intensity she brought to building fairy houses. "I think we can handle those particular hazards. And the rest of it? The fact that some people will always see you as the wife of a former crime boss? The reality that our children will grow up with bodyguards and security protocols? Lorenzo." I cupped his face in my hands, making sure he met my eyes. "I walked into your world voluntarily. I fought beside you when it mattered. I chose this life knowing exactly what it would mean." I smiled. "Besides, our children will also grow up with parents who love them, who'll protect them, and who'll teach them that family is worth fighting for. I think that matters more than anything else." Later that night, as I lay beside Lorenzo in our bed listening to the quiet sounds of our home settling around us, I thought about the path that had brought us here. A broken-down car, a desperate knock on the wrong door, a man dangerous enough to kill my father, but gentle enough to read bedtime stories to my daughter. None of it should have worked. By every rational measure, Lorenzo and I were impossible. A trauma nurse and a mafia boss, a struggling single mother and a man who'd built an empire on violence and fear. But somehow, in the space between those contradictions, we'd found something real and lasting and worth every sacrifice we'd made to protect it. Tomorrow, Sophia would wake up in a house where she felt safe and loved. Mrs. Hernandez would make breakfast while humming old Spanish lullabies. Lorenzo would handle whatever challenges his businesses presented, but he'd be home for dinner because family came first now. And I would work my shift at the hospital, saving lives and making a difference in the world, knowing that at the end of the day, I had a home worth coming back to. Sometimes the wrong door leads to exactly the right place. Sometimes the most dangerous choice turns out to be the safest one you'll ever make. Sometimes broken cars and midnight encounters change everything in the most beautiful ways possible. I was no longer the desperate woman who'd knocked on Lorenzo's door that night. I was stronger, more dangerous in my own way, and absolutely certain of where I belonged. I belonged here, with him, building something better than either of us could have imagined alone.